My name is Gerald Hutchins. I served 22 years in the British Army, 14 of those with the Household Division. I have stood in places that would make most people's legs give out. I have held position under conditions that I am not legally permitted to describe in full detail even now. I have been cold enough to lose feeling in 3 fingers simultaneously, and hot enough that the sweat soaked through ceremonial wool that cost more than my first month's salary. I have done all of this without blinking, without shifting, without making a single sound that was not authorized by the man above me in the chain of command. So when I tell you that the morning of July 14th felt wrong before a single thing had happened, I need you to understand that I am not a man who says things like that lightly. I am not dramatic. I do not believe in premonitions. I believe in observation, pattern recognition, and the kind of deep training that rewires your nervous system until your body knows things your brain has not yet processed. That is not mysticism. That is 22 years of work. The briefing that morning was standard, completely, unremarkably standard. Sergeant Davies ran through the schedule the way he always did, clipped sentences. No eye contact, coffee going cold in his hand because he never remembered to drink it while it was hot. Ceremonial changeover at 11:00. Peak tourist window estimated between 10:30 and 13:00. Weather clear. Expected crowd volume high due to the summer season. 2 school groups confirmed. 1 diplomatic visit in the afternoon that was above our clearance level to discuss in detail. Nothing flagged, nothing elevated. The threat assessment that morning was the same color it had been for 11 consecutive days. I remember thinking, as Davies dismissed us, that it was going to be one of those long, slow, photogenic days. The kind where you stand perfectly still while approximately 400 people take photographs of you as though you are a particularly interesting piece of furniture. The kind where tourists from 7 different countries try whispering things at you to see if they can make you react, and you spend 8 hours being the world's most overdressed statue. I took my position at the gate at 10:47, 13 minutes early. I was always 13 minutes early, not 12, not 15, 13. My old sergeant from basic training, a man named Corporal Reeves who had the personality of a particularly unforgiving brick wall, had once told me that a man who is exactly on time is already running late, and a man who is early has time to breathe and see. I had never forgotten it. 13 minutes became my number because it was the gap between being prepared and being comfortable, and comfort, Reeves always said, was the enemy of readiness. The gates at Buckingham Palace in July are something most people only understand from photographs. What the photographs do not capture is the noise. It is constant and layered, tour guides speaking into handheld microphones in 6 different languages, children asking questions that their parents cannot answer, camera shutters going in rapid succession, the low hydraulic hiss of tour buses pulling up and releasing passengers like pressurized breath. It is a wall of sound that you learn to filter. You learn to hear through it, not over it. You isolate. You separate frequencies. The trained ear stops hearing the noise and starts hearing the gaps in the noise, the silences, the irregularities. I stood at my position. I breathed. The crowd was already gathering beyond the barrier, phones raised, faces half hidden behind screens. A child in a bright yellow raincoat, completely unnecessary given the clear sky, but children in London are dressed for weather that has not arrived yet as a matter of cultural tradition, was already pointing at me with the specific fascination that children reserve for things they do not fully understand. The summer air smelled like sunscreen and bus exhaust, and the particular metallic warmth of iron railings that have been baking since early morning. Everything was standard, and yet there was something, not a sound, not a movement, not anything I could have pointed to in those first minutes and named with any confidence. Just a quality in the air, a slight wrongness in the texture of the morning, the way sometimes a room feels different before you can identify what has changed in it. I filed it in the back of my mind and kept my eyes moving the way I had been trained to do. Steady, methodical, never stopping on any single point long enough to signal what you are looking at. 13 minutes passed. The changeover happened. I was officially on post. The day began. By 11:20, the crowd had doubled in size. This was normal for a Tuesday in July. The tour buses had synchronized their arrivals the way they always did, disgorging passengers in waves, and the waves had collided at the gate into a dense, cheerful, enormously photogenic mass of human beings who all wanted the same photograph of the same gate with the same guard standing in it. This is where I should explain the photobombing situation, because it is relevant and also because it is the kind of thing that sounds absurd when you describe it, but becomes completely believable the moment you have stood a ceremonial post in a tourist location for more than 40 minutes. It started with a man in a Hawaiian shirt. He was tall, enthusiastic, and appeared to be traveling with a group of approximately 15 people who were all wearing matching green lanyards that identified them as part of a tour called, I could read from my peripheral vision, Brilliant Britain Experiences. He positioned himself directly beside me, not in front of me, beside me, as though we were old friends, and held up a thumbs up while his wife took the photograph. Fine, this happens. I am furniture. I accept this. What I did not expect was that, in the exact moment his wife took the photograph, a pigeon landed on my bearskin hat. I did not move. Pigeon or no pigeon, I do not move. This is a matter of considerable personal pride. The pigeon seemed to appreciate the stability and settled in with every appearance of intending to stay. The man in the Hawaiian shirt, who had been expecting a photo of himself next to a stoic guard, instead got a photo of himself next to a stoic guard wearing a live pigeon. And his reaction, a burst of genuine, delighted laughter, drew the attention of approximately 30 people nearby, who all then also wanted this photograph. The pigeon stayed for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I know this because I counted. When it finally left, it did so with complete indifference, as though it had simply completed a scheduled appointment. The crowd laughed. Several people applauded. One woman, from what I believe was a German tour group, actually cheered. I remained furniture, but I logged the moment because it created a gap. A 30-second window where the attention of a large section of the crowd was concentrated entirely on me and the pigeon, which meant that in my peripheral vision, in that gap, I had a clean scan of the crowd behind them. And that is when I first saw him. He was standing approximately 12 meters back from the main barrier, not at the barrier, away from it. This was the first wrong detail. Every person in that crowd was pressing toward the barrier because the barrier was where the photograph happened, where the guard was, where the attraction was. The entire gravitational logic of a tourist crowd pulls toward the center point. You do not stand 12 meters back unless you are waiting for someone, or you have already taken your photograph and are waiting to leave, or you have no interest in the attraction at all. He was not waiting for anyone. His head was not turned toward an exit, and he was very definitely not a man who had already gotten his photograph and was satisfied. He was standing still in a crowd of constant movement, and he was watching. Not the gate, not me, the crowd itself. I noted him. I did not react. I kept my eyes moving in their steady, trained pattern. But I had him now, logged in the part of my brain that keeps running even when the rest of me is performing complete stillness. He was somewhere between 35 and 45 years old, medium height, dressed in a way that was almost aggressively neutral: gray jacket, dark trousers, unremarkable trainers. Nothing that would catch the eye, nothing that would make a camera pause on him. He had no phone raised, no camera, no lanyard, no tour group visible around him. He was simply standing and watching and being completely, professionally invisible in a crowd of people who were making themselves as visible as possible. Almost invisible, but not to me. The pigeon had been gone for 11 minutes when I began building the catalog. This is something they teach you formally, and then you spend years refining it until it becomes less a technique and more a reflex. You build a picture from small details the way a doctor reads a patient, not from the single dramatic symptom, but from the accumulation of small signs that individually mean nothing and together mean everything. Skin color, breathing pattern, posture, weight distribution, eye movement. The body tells the truth even when everything else is performing a lie. The man in the gray jacket was performing neutral. He was very good at it. But performing neutral is still a performance, and performances have tells. His shoes were wrong. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. His shoes were dark, clean, with thick rubber soles and a low profile. The kind of shoe that is built for standing for long periods and then moving quickly. Not tourist shoes. Tourists wear trainers that have accumulated the specific kind of dirt that comes from airport floors and European cobblestones. They wear sandals that they slightly regret. They wear brand new white shoes that they bought specifically for the trip. His shoes were broken in but not worn out, clean but not new, and they were the shoes of someone who had thought about what he would need his feet to do today. His breathing was wrong. At 12 meters I cannot hear a man breathe, but I can see it. The chest movement. At rest, a human being breathes somewhere between 12 and 20 times per minute. A man in a crowd on a warm July morning, standing without movement, tends toward the higher end of that range. His breathing was slow, controlled, deliberately managed. The breathing of someone who has trained themselves to maintain a low resting state in high-stimulus environments. Military training produces this. Certain kinds of law enforcement training produce this. A small number of other training regimens produce this, and not all of them are on the right side of any line I want to think about. His eye movement was wrong. A person watching a crowd out of general interest moves their eyes in a pattern that follows novelty, the child who falls down, the couple arguing, the tour guide saying something loud. The eyes chase interest. His eyes were not chasing interest. They were moving in a grid, methodical, systematic. He was not watching what was interesting. He was watching what was positioned, exits, guards, barrier gaps, the camera positions mounted above the gate. He was reading the location the way you read a location before you do something in it that you have planned. I had been watching him for 9 minutes at this point. He had not moved from his position. He had not taken out a phone. He had not spoken to anyone. He had not looked at me directly, not once, which is itself a form of telling detail. Because in a crowd of tourists, the ceremonial guard is the primary attraction, and even people who are not interested in taking a photograph will glance at the guard. It is involuntary. He had not glanced at me once in 9 minutes. He knew exactly where I was without looking at me. The running gag chose this exact moment to reassert itself. A family, mother, father, 3 children under the age of 8. All 3 children in matching outfits that suggested their mother had extremely strong organizational opinions, positioned themselves beside me for a photograph. The father raised his phone. The mother arranged the children. The children, because they were children, immediately began to rearrange themselves in ways their mother had not authorized. The smallest one, a girl of perhaps 4 years old in a dress the color of a fire engine, looked up at me with the specific expression of a child who has just had an idea that no adult in her vicinity is going to enjoy. She patted my leg, once firmly, like checking whether I was real. I was real. I did not react. She patted it again, more experimentally this time. The mother, in a whispered shriek that was somehow both inaudible and completely audible, said her name 3 times with increasing levels of maternal alarm. The father was laughing too hard to take the photograph. The other 2 children, recognizing that their sister had found something interesting, immediately also wanted to pat the guard. This went on for 90 seconds. The crowd around them found it enormously entertaining. I remained furniture with great personal effort and professional dignity. And in those 90 seconds, with the crowd's attention absorbed by 3 small children and their guard-patting adventure, I watched the man in the gray jacket take 3 steps to his left. Just 3 steps. Slow, even, completely casual. But 3 steps to his left put him in direct line with the main gate's eastern access point. The gap in the barrier that ceremonial staff used, that was currently unmanned because both of the officers who would normally flank it had drifted slightly toward the crowd disturbance the children were creating. He was not moving toward anything. He was positioning. The catalog clicked. The unease that had been sitting unnamed in the back of my awareness since 10:47 that morning suddenly had a shape. I kept my face completely still. I kept my body completely still. But something in my entire nervous system went very, very quiet in the way that it goes quiet when everything that is not essential shuts down to make room for what is about to be required. At 11:43, the woman appeared. She came from the left side of the crowd, moving against the grain of tourist traffic with the specific energy of someone who has decided they have a grievance, and the world is going to hear about it. She was somewhere in her 50s, dressed in a bright floral blouse, carrying a large tote bag that appeared to contain approximately everything she owned, and she was already talking loudly before she reached the barrier. Her grievance, as far as I could determine from the words reaching me through the crowd noise, was related to the position of the barrier itself. She felt it was too far back. She had come a very long way. She said this several times, each time with additional emphasis on the word very, and she could not see properly from where the barrier was positioned, and she wanted to speak to someone in charge about this, and she was going to stand right here until she did. The crowd around her did what crowds do with loud, confident people. They made space, not because they agreed with her, because volume has a gravity of its own, and most people's instinct in the presence of sustained public outrage is to create a buffer between themselves and it. She was very loud. She was very insistent. She had opinions about the barriers, about the lack of signage, about the tourist information she had been given, about a previous visit in which she had apparently been permitted to stand much closer, and about several ancillary issues that she was prepared to enumerate at length. Two of the plainclothes security officers near the barrier moved toward her. This was protocol. A disturbance at the barrier gets managed immediately and quietly. You isolate, you engage, you de-escalate. Standard procedure. Both of them oriented toward her with the trained, casual movement of people who are trying to look like they are not doing what they are doing. Every camera in the vicinity turned toward her. Every tourist head turned toward her. Every guard in my peripheral vision showed the slight postural adjustment of people whose attention has been redirected. She was magnificent at it, I will give her that. She had the crowd's complete attention inside 40 seconds, which is a very short time to achieve total audience capture in a space that large. She escalated perfectly, never quite tipping into the kind of behavior that would require immediate physical intervention, always staying at exactly the volume and intensity that demanded engagement but not removal. It was, from a purely technical standpoint, an exceptionally well-executed performance. And it was a performance. I was certain of it in the way you are certain of things that your training has prepared you to recognize without being able to immediately articulate why. Because in the moment that every head turned left, I turned my eyes right. The man in the gray jacket was moving. Not running, not rushing, walking with the relaxed, purposeful stride of a man who is going somewhere he has every right to go, at a pace that would not make anyone's eyes stop on him. 3 security staff had moved toward the woman. The eastern access point had a single officer remaining, and that officer's head, I watched it happen in real time, turned toward the noise. For approximately 4 seconds, the eastern access point had no direct eyes on it. The man in the gray jacket was 8 meters from it. Then 6. I broke position. I want to be precise about what breaking position means, because people who have not stood ceremonial post do not fully understand the weight of it. A household division guard on post does not move. This is not a guideline. It is not a strong suggestion. It is the fundamental, non-negotiable contract of the role. You are stillness made human. You are the physical embodiment of an institution that has stood for centuries and will stand for centuries more regardless of what any individual human being is experiencing in their body or their mind. You move when you are authorized to move. You speak when you are authorized to speak. You exist, in every practical sense, as something other than an individual person for the duration of your post. The last time a household division guard at Buckingham Palace broke position without direct authorization on a public ceremonial day was, and I know this because I looked it up afterward, in the specific way that you look things up when you are trying to understand whether what you did is precedent. 1982. The incident with Michael Fagan. Most people know the story from the wrong direction. They think about the failure of the system. I always thought about the guard who finally moved. I moved. Not dramatically. Not with any visible urgency that the crowd would clock as alarm. This was not a film. There was no music. I did not run. I stepped off my position with the controlled, deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision and is committed to it completely. And I moved at a pace that would register to any casual observer as purposeful but not panic. Because panic in a crowd is its own kind of disaster, and I was not prepared to create a second problem while managing the first one. 7 steps. That is how many steps it took me to intercept him. He saw me coming after 5. I know because his stride changed, a fractional hesitation, a recalibration, the slight physical stutter of a plan encountering an unexpected variable. He recovered quickly. He was good, but the hesitation was there, and it told me everything about whether my read on him had been correct. I positioned myself in his path, not blocking, not grabbing, not creating a scene. I simply became an obstacle that required him to either go around me, which would have taken him away from the access point, or stop. He stopped. We stood approximately 1 meter apart. His eyes met mine for the first time in the 43 minutes I had been watching him. Up close, he was older than I had estimated. Early 50s. The skin around his eyes had the particular quality of someone who has spent years in outdoor environments and years not sleeping enough. His jaw was set. His breathing, even now, was controlled. We looked at each other for what I can only describe as a very long 2 seconds. I did not speak. He did not speak. Speaking was not what was happening between us in that moment. What was happening was a very specific kind of communication between 2 people who have both been trained in ways that most people have not, and who both understand, without it needing to be said, that the other person knows exactly what is occurring. Then from my left, there were footsteps. 2 of the plainclothes officers, the ones who had been managing the woman, were moving toward us. Not because they had seen what I had seen. Because I had left my post, and a guard leaving his post is itself an alarm signal that gets responded to. The man in the gray jacket looked at the approaching officers. He looked back at me, and something in his face settled, the way a thing settles when it accepts a new condition. He took a single step backward. One of the officers reached us. He spoke quietly, using the specific low register of trained security personnel who are managing something they do not want the crowd to hear. He asked the man in the gray jacket for identification. The man complied immediately, reached slowly, deliberately, into his jacket pocket, and produced documentation that I was not in a position to read clearly, but that the officer examined for a considerable time before stepping slightly to the side and speaking into his radio. The woman at the barrier had gone quiet. The crowd, deprived of both dramas simultaneously, shifted and shuffled and began taking photographs of the gate again. I returned to my position. The pigeon did not return. This felt like a reasonable trade. What happened in the 40 minutes following that 2-second exchange is something I am going to describe in the broad terms that I am permitted to describe it in. Because there are specifics that I was not privy to, and specifics that I was privy to that remain outside what I will put into words in a public account. The man in the gray jacket was taken to a secondary location within the palace complex. This is a sentence that sounds bureaucratic, and is, in fact, exactly as serious as you understand it to be when you have spent any time in security environments. The woman with the tote bag was also taken to a secondary location. She and the man were not related by any personal connection that was immediately apparent, but the precise coincidence of their simultaneous arrival at their respective positions. She at the barrier creating maximum distraction, he at the access point during the window that distraction created, was the kind of coincidence that stops being coincidence after you have accounted for the probability of it occurring naturally. I learned this not in the moment but over the following days, in the specific piecemeal way that information filters down through a security operation. Fragments, not the full picture, each fragment confirmed by a different source, until the shape of the thing becomes clear even if the details remain officially unknown to someone at my level. What I knew immediately, standing back at my position at 11:58, was this. The threat assessment for that morning had been wrong color. The paperwork had been clean. The briefing had been unremarkable. And something had almost happened at the eastern access point of Buckingham Palace, gate on a Tuesday morning in July, in front of approximately 300 tourists, most of whom were still taking photographs of the gate and the guards, and were completely, blessedly unaware that the day had been anything other than a very pleasant summer outing. The running gag made one final appearance. At 12:04, a man in a full Paddington Bear costume. I do not know why he was in a Paddington Bear costume. This was never explained to me, and I did not ask, positioned himself beside me for what I assumed was a novelty photograph. He came up to approximately my shoulder. He held a small red suitcase. He stood there for 3 minutes with complete commitment to whatever he was doing, and the crowd loved him, and he eventually shuffled away with the dignity of a fictional bear who has done what he came to do. I did not move. I am the guard, I remained. At 13:00, my post-rotation came. I handed off to the next man with a standard acknowledgement. I walked back inside. I removed my bearskin. I sat down in the staff room with a cup of tea that was already going cold because nobody in the British military has ever successfully managed to drink a hot beverage while it is still hot, and I stared at the wall for approximately 4 minutes. Sergeant Davies came in at the 4-minute mark. He looked at me. He looked at the tea. He sat down across from me without saying anything, which was how Davies communicated that he had been briefed and was giving me the space to be a human being for a moment before the paperwork started. The paperwork started. I wrote the incident report in the specific language that incident reports require, precise, sequential, stripped of interpretation, every observation cataloged with its time stamp and its factual description, and nothing that could be characterized as subjective. The shoes, the breathing pattern, the eye movement, the 3 steps to the left, the timing relative to the woman's appearance at the barrier, the 7 steps, the 2 seconds of eye contact. Every piece of it in order, in the flat professional language of a man, documenting what he saw so that other people can determine what it meant. It took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to write. When I finished, Davies read it twice. He did not say anything immediately. He took it, nodded once in the way that Davies nodded when something had been handled correctly, and left. Outside, I could hear the crowd still gathered at the gate. The tour buses, the camera shutters, the layered noise of several hundred people having a perfectly pleasant Tuesday in London, completely unaware that the pleasant Tuesday had been, for approximately 4 seconds, something else entirely. I left the household division 14 months after that Tuesday in July. The decision was mine, made for reasons that were personal and accumulated, and had been building for longer than I care to specify. The service had been everything Reeves told me it would be, and several things he had not mentioned, and I do not regret a single day of it, including the days that were, by any reasonable measure, genuinely terrible. The incident report I filed was classified at a level that means I cannot tell you the outcome in any specific detail. I can tell you that both individuals were processed through the appropriate channels. I can tell you that the threat assessment protocols for that gate location were subsequently reviewed. I can tell you that a number of changes were made to operational procedures that I am not in a position to specify because I was not in the room where those decisions were made. What I can tell you is what happened 3 weeks after the incident, when I was called into the office of a senior officer, whose name I will not include here because he is still active and his privacy is his own. He was a man I had enormous respect for, the kind of officer who has the particular quality of absolute authority worn so naturally that you stop noticing it the way you stop noticing the weight of your uniform. It is simply part of the shape of the world when he is in the room. He sat across from me, and he looked at me for a long moment with the expression of a man who is deciding how to say something. He said the report was clean. I said, "Thank you, sir." He said, "I mean it was technically clean. Everything you observed, every decision you made, it was all in the report in a way that is defensible." I understood what he was not saying. What I had done had been defensible. It had also been, by the precise letter of the protocols governing ceremonial post, unauthorized. I had left position without direct authorization. This is a serious matter regardless of the reason, and the reason, while it had proven to be correct, had at the point of the decision been nothing more than accumulated observation and instinct. I could not have put into words in that moment of those 7 steps a case that would satisfy a review board. I had moved on a feeling that was the product of 22 years of training, and the feeling had been right, and the fact that it had been right did not retroactively make the movement authorized. He looked at the report on his desk. He looked at me. Then he took a pen and wrote 4 words in the margin of the last page. He turned it so I could read it. Then he closed the file. I read the 4 words. I never saw that file again. But I have thought about those 4 words more than I have thought about almost anything else from that career, because they contain something that I have tried to carry with me in every situation I have been in since, in security consulting, in the training work I do now with young officers who are learning what it means to hold a position under pressure, in the conversations I have with people who ask me what it means to be disciplined, what it means to follow protocol, what the line is between obedience and abdication. Here is what I tell them, and it is the closest I will come to repeating what was in that margin. Rules are architecture. They are the structure that holds everything up, and you do not remove load-bearing walls because you feel like it, and you do not ignore the structure because it is inconvenient. And the people who built the rules built them because something happened that required them, and you owe those people the respect of taking that seriously. But architecture is built for people. It is built to protect something that lives inside it. And there are moments, rare, serious, requiring more earned judgment than most people will ever be called upon to exercise, when the structure itself requires you to act in a way that the structure's written rules do not authorize, because the alternative is that the thing the structure was built to protect does not survive. Those moments are not excuses. They are not loopholes. They are not opportunities for every person who finds a rule inconvenient to declare themselves the exception. They are the moments that separate the people who understand what the rules are for from the people who only understand what the rules say. The guard at the eastern access point that Tuesday in July broke position without authorization. He did it because 22 years of accumulated, careful, disciplined training produced a judgment that something was wrong before he could prove it was wrong, and he trusted that judgment over the written protocol, and he was correct. He also wrote the cleanest incident report of his career immediately afterward, documented every observation that had driven the decision, and submitted himself to complete review without complaint, because accountability is not the enemy of judgment. It is the proof that the judgment was made by someone who understands what they are doing and why. I was the guard at the eastern access point. Nobody in that crowd of 300 tourists knows that anything happened. They have their photographs, the gate, the bearskin, the pigeon, the 3 small children, the Paddington bear, all of it captured in their camera rolls as a lovely summer day in London. Some of those photographs are probably on a wall somewhere. Some of them are screensavers. Some of them are in albums that will outlast the people who took them. In most of those photographs, if you look at the guard in the frame, you will see a man who is completely, utterly, professionally still. What you will not see is everything that stillness required. And you will not see the 7 steps. But they happened, and I would take them again.